Chapter 1. The Calculated Exile. King Logan told the court that he was sending his queen away for her health. He said it with a calm voice, a steady voice, the kind of voice men used when they wanted cruelty to sound noble. Queen Vanya stood in the center of the throne room and listened as though the words were meant for someone else. A period of rest, he called it. A quiet retreat. A necessary pause. The nobles lowered their eyes. The courtiers pretended not to watch. The servants moved with the careful speed of people who knew that the wrong glance could become a punishment. And Logan, with his silver crown and flawless coat and cold green eyes, looked at her as if he were doing her a mercy. Vanya kept her hands folded in front of her and did not blink. Because the truth was that she had spent 5 years learning how not to blink. 5 years as his wife. 5 years as the only human woman in a court full of wolves, fang shifters, blood oath nobles, and silent old women who treated her like an experiment that had failed to produce useful results. 5 years of being watched, measured, judged. 5 years of being told that a queen without an heir was not a queen at all. Logan had never screamed at her, he had never struck her, he had never needed to. He had controlled everything else. When she ate, when she spoke, where she sat, which chambers she slept in, how many attendants she was allowed to keep, which physicians were permitted to examine her, which ceremonies she was expected to attend, which rituals she was expected to endure. And every time her monthly blood came and the royal physicians shook their heads, the court looked at her like she had somehow insulted the crown by remaining barren. This was not banishment, Logan said. This was kindness. This was recovery. This was an opportunity for her to recover her strength in the Rust Lands, a remote border territory beyond the inner provinces where the air was thinner, the roads harsher, and the kingdom sent its unwanted burdens to fade quietly into obscurity. The Rust Lands. The place no one praised. The place no one visited. The place where old mines had collapsed, where factories had once fed the war machine of a long-dead generation, where the kingdom stored its broken people and its broken promises. Vanya let him finish. Then she bowed her head. If the court had expected tears, it received nothing. If Logan had expected pleading, he received no such pleasure. If anyone had thought she would collapse under the humiliation, they were destined to be disappointed. Because Vanya had not merely listened to Logan's sentence. She had already planned around it. A servant approached with a leather folder. "The travel papers, Your Majesty." Vanya took them. Inside were the formal documents of her removal, her lodging assignment, and the royal seal authorizing her relocation. The pages were boring, ordinary, administrative, and tucked beneath them, hidden in the same folder by a sympathetic clerk she had quietly cultivated for 2 years, were the copies of the border ledgers she had spent months memorizing. The tax route maps, the supply schedules, the shipment timings, the names of the intermediaries, the capital rotations, the unreported iron quotas, the private relay points, the quiet little logistical arteries that kept the kingdom alive, while Logan spent his nights congratulating himself on his divine bloodline. Vanya had not been collecting them for revenge. Not at first. She had been collecting them because she was lonely, because she was trapped, because she had learned very early that people ignored a queen if they believed she was irrelevant, and irrelevant people could learn things no one else would tell them. 5 years of being underestimated had become her education. 5 years of being dismissed had become her weapon. And now Logan, who thought he was discarding dead weight, was sending that weapon directly where it needed to be. The coach waited at the gate. The palace courtyard was full of watchers. Vanya walked past them all with her chin high, her cloak perfect, her face unreadable. She did not turn to look at Logan one last time. She did not give him the satisfaction of seeing pain. Inside the coach, Martha sat stiffly with her hands clenched in her lap. Martha was not a wolf, not a noble, not a strategist, just a sharp-eyed avian shifter who had served in the Queen's private chambers long enough to become more than a servant and less than a friend. She looked sick with fear. "My queen," she whispered. Vanya slid the papers into her satchel and smiled. "I know." Martha stared at her. "You are taking this extremely well. I've been preparing for this day for a long time." Martha's eyes widened. "You knew?" "No," Vanya said, "but I suspected I'd eventually stop being useful to the king." The coach rolled forward. The palace gates opened. And just like that, she was gone. The road to the Rust Lands was long enough to strip away pretense. The first day was all polished stone and mapped roads. The second day became packed earth and roadside shrines. The third day crossed into the outer forests where the air smelled of pine resin, damp wood, and old smoke. By the fourth day, the roads were narrower, and the wagons they passed were loaded with scrap metal, coal, and blackened timber. By the fifth, the land itself seemed to bend under a different kind of pressure. The sky turned gray. The wind changed, and the Rust Lands came into view. Martha made a sound of dismay. Because whatever the royal guides had meant by border estate, this was not an estate. It was a factory complex built into the remains of an old military district, towering with smokestacks and stitched together by iron walkways, riveted walls, crane arms, conveyor rails, and old stone foundations that had survived generations by accident more than design. The air was thick with soot. Lights burned behind grated windows. Steam hissed from buried pipes in the ground. The whole place looked alive in a rough, mechanical, stubborn way. It did not look luxurious. It looked useful. The coach rolled to a stop in front of a large iron gate. There were no ceremonial attendants. No polished welcome. No musicians. No silk banners. Only workers in soot-streaked coats, some human, some shifter, some with visible scars, some with limbs braced in metal supports, all of them staring at the arriving queen as though she were either a spy or a bad joke. Then Vanya saw the man waiting at the front. Tall, broad, scarred along the jaw, dark coat, black gloves, one eye half-shadowed by the angle of the smoke. He did not bow. He did not smile. He simply looked at her as though he had already decided she was either useful or impossible. "Gideon," Martha murmured beside her, voice shaking. The name struck something in the air. Vanya had heard it before, of course. The disgraced commander. The king's former war hound. The wolf who had been stripped of his rank after a border campaign no one liked to discuss. The man who was said to have lost his shift after a silver blade punishment, and who now controlled the Rust Lands because no one else could keep the place from collapsing into itself. He was the reason half the court whispered about this territory like it was cursed. And he was the first thing Vanya saw when she stepped off the coach. "You're late," he said. Martha inhaled sharply. Vanya only looked at him. "You are Gideon." "That depends on who's asking." "Your new queen." He stared at her for a beat. Then his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "That remains to be seen." Vanya inclined her head slightly and surveyed the compound behind him. Her eyes immediately started taking measurements. Gate width, watch height, crane placement, load routes, fuel stacks, labor paths, water access. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Deciding how much of this place is salvageable." He gave a short, unimpressed breath. "That sounds optimistic." "It's practical." Gideon looked at her, as though he expected vanity or panic or pleading. He found none of it. Instead, he found a queen who was already mentally rearranging his world. That unsettled him. It should have. Inside the compound, the workers stood aside as she passed. Their expressions were cautious. Some resentful. Some intrigued. Some openly hostile. One woman with a scar over her lip muttered, "Another royal mistake." Martha heard it and stiffened. Vanya heard it too. She did not react, because she had learned that if people expected a collapse, the fastest way to disappoint them was to behave as if the insult had never reached you. Gideon led her through the compound to a structure that had once been a storage hall and was now a kind of temporary administrative chamber. The walls were iron-plated, the floor reinforced, the windows thin and high, and the room smelled of coal dust and old paperwork. He gestured toward a chair. Vanya did not sit. Instead, she opened her satchel and took out the first ledger. Gideon watched her carefully. "You brought that from the palace." "I brought several." "Why?" "Because you have a kingdom-sized problem, and I've spent 5 years learning where the kingdom is bleeding." He folded his arms. "And what makes you think I want your help?" She set the ledger on the table and slid it toward him. "Because Logan sent me here to be forgotten," she said, "and I have no intention of making his mistake convenient for him." That got his attention. Slowly, he opened the book. His eyes skimmed the entries. Then he looked up. "What is this?" "Supply routing," she said. "The palace is siphoning materials through a hidden levee network. Iron, coal, salt, medical compounds. They've been bleeding your region for years and labeling it border loss." Gideon's face hardened. Martha stared. Vanya continued calmly, as if she were reading a grocery list. "You're also overpaying on transport labor, because the palace diverted one of your relays 3 years ago, and no one corrected the accounting path. That means your workers are carrying the cost of a route they don't even use anymore." Gideon's gaze sharpened. "And how do you know that?" "Because I was sitting across from the Minister of Trade 2 months ago when he boasted about it." "Why didn't you report it?" Vanya met his eyes. "Would you have believed me?" The question landed with force. Because now the answer was obvious. The Queen had not come to the Rust Lands as a victim. She had come prepared. Gideon studied her a long moment, then closed the ledger. "You either think very highly of yourself," he said, "or you've been planning this." "I've been planning." That was the first day. By nightfall, she had inspected half the foundry, counted the staff, identified the weak points in the rail system, and corrected one collapsed ration stack with such precision that 3 workers had stopped to stare at her in disbelief. Martha had not stopped worrying since they arrived. "Your Majesty," she whispered later, while they were alone in the sparse chamber assigned to them, "you shouldn't be so calm." Vanya looked out through the high window at the smoke stacks, glowing faint orange in the dark. "I am not calm." "You don't look frightened." "Because fear is a luxury," Vanya said softly, "and I can only afford so much of it at once." Martha sat beside her on the narrow bed, still unsettled. "Do you really think this place can become something?" Vanya was silent a moment. Then she said, "I think this place already is something. It's just been waiting for someone to notice." That night, the wind rattled the steel frame of the compound. The foundry groaned. Steam hissed in the distance. And somewhere beyond the walls, the wilderness answered with a low, animal sound. Vanya lay awake, listening to the machinery breathe. Not because she was afraid of the Rust Lands. Because she was not. She was afraid of what she had already begun to feel. A strange, dangerous sensation. The sense that she had not been sent here to disappear, but to begin. And that was far worse. Chapter 2, The Outcast Syndicate. The next morning, Gideon returned with 2 things. A warning. And a test. The warning was simple. No one in the Rust Lands trusted royalty. Not the workers. Not the guards. Not the shifters who had lost their status in the war. Not the old families who remembered what the crown had taken from them. If Vanya wanted to survive here, she would have to earn the right to stand in the open like she belonged. The test was more humiliating. He handed her a stack of routing books, 3 broken ledgers, and a metal stylus that looked like it had been used to pry open crates. "See if you can make sense of these," he said. Vanya accepted them without comment. Martha frowned. "This is an outrage." "Is it?" Vanya asked, already opening the first ledger. She ran through the entries once. Then again. Then a third time. The numbers told a story. Not all of it clean. Not all of it accidental. The Rust lands had been starved by design. The crown had not merely neglected them. It had engineered dependency. The whole border region was being kept one bad winter away from collapse. Which meant Logan was not merely cruel. He was strategic. And stupid enough to assume nobody would notice. Vanya looked up. "You are shipping out iron ore before it's fully processed." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "That's not new." "It becomes a problem when the royal inspectors are charging you a refinement tax on material that never reaches refinement quality." He stared. She tapped the ledger. "You're paying twice for the same ore." One of the workers in the room made a low, startled sound. Gideon looked over his shoulder and snapped, "Leave us." The workers filed out reluctantly. Once the room was clear, he took the ledger back and rechecked the page. His jaw tightened. "Show me." She pointed. He swore under his breath. Then he flipped to another section. Then another. And another. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. The compound had been gutted in pieces. Not by accident. By intention. His face changed. Not with surprise. With anger. Vanya watched him carefully. "Who built the tax paths?" she asked. He looked up. "The palace." "No, I mean who built the actual root structure, who designed the choke points." He hesitated. Then said, "Old border engineers, human mostly, some shifters before the war." "Good." He gave her a flat stare. "Why is that good?" "Because it means the structure can be understood. And if it can be understood, it can be reworked." Gideon looked at her like she was dangerous. He was correct. By the 3rd day, she had a rough floor map. By the 5th, she had identified 3 overlooked maintenance corridors, 1 dead ventilation shaft, and a service tunnel that had once connected the old furnace unit to the storage hall. By the 7th, she had the workers shifting loads through a safer, faster route. By the 9th, she had reduced coal loss by 12%. By the 12th, the compound was running noticeably smoother. And people were watching her. At first with suspicion. Then with confusion. Then with interest. Martha noticed it before Vanya did. "You have a following," she said one afternoon as they crossed the yard. Vanya didn't look up from the shipment note in her hand. "No, I don't." "You do." "Because I corrected a route schedule. Because you corrected their lives." Vanya glanced at the workers. A pair of iron-smudged boys were arguing over a pulley fix. An older woman with a missing finger was showing another worker how to angle a reinforcement brace. 2 wolf shifters were lifting a crate together, while one of them limped badly from an old war injury. No one here had the luxury of uselessness. That alone made them more honest than court. The woman with the missing finger looked over and gave Vanya a brief nod. Not warmth. Not trust. Acknowledgement. That was enough to matter. Later that week, Gideon found Vanya in the lower archive room with her sleeves rolled up and her hair pinned back while she sorted older supply maps. He paused in the doorway. She looked up. "If you're here to complain about my methods, you're late." "I'm here because the workers asked for you." That got her attention. She set down the pen. They did. Yes. Why? Because you fixed the east pump line without breaking the intake valve. Vanya blinked. That seems like a low bar. It is, he said, which is part of the problem. He stepped farther into the room and crossed his arms. You've made enemies by being useful. That sounds like a compliment. It is. The air between them shifted. They were standing closer, now than either of them intended. Vanya could smell Cole's smoke on his coat and something cleaner beneath it, like cold rain on stone. He was looking at her with that same hard, measuring expression, but the suspicion had changed shape. It no longer felt like accusation. It felt like attention. Vanya turned back to the map before either of them could name the feeling. You asked me to earn my place, she said. I'm doing that. You're doing more than that. She paused. He stepped closer to the table. The light from the lantern cut across his jaw, then the broad line of his shoulder, then the scar near his throat she had noticed only once and now couldn't stop seeing. You're not just fixing ledgers, he said. You're organizing people. That made her smile faintly. You say that like it's a crime. In the wrong hands, it is. In the wrong hands, everything is. Gideon said nothing to that, because she had struck something true. The next test came that same evening. A royal tax caravan was scheduled to pass through the canyon tunnel north of the compound. 3 wagons, 2 escort squads, supply crates labeled for winter redistribution. Vanya asked for the route log. Gideon gave it to her. She studied the path, then the weather records, then the canyon map, then the old industrial drainage shaft that cut under the eastern ridge. When she finished, she said, "Do you want the caravan captured or redirected?" Gideon looked at her sharply. "Neither. We want it delayed long enough to stop the royal relay from noticing. Then we don't attack the caravan." "We do." "No, we make the road attack itself." He studied her in silence. Then, for the first time, he looked almost amused. And because that expression was rare on him, it unsettled her more than his scowls had. "What do you need?" he asked. 3 pressure valves, 2 lantern flares, 6 workers who don't panic. Only 6. Only 6 if your canyon map is accurate. He actually laughed. It was brief, rough, and so unexpected that it made the room feel warmer. Vanya looked at him. He noticed her noticing. His amusement faded into something else. Something slower. Something heavier. Then he turned away and gave the order. The caravan never knew what happened. The road shifted. A false collapse blocked the tunnel entrance. The escort wagons were forced to reroute. A steam burst from the drainage shaft, spooked the horses at exactly the wrong time, just enough to throw the front vehicle off alignment and jam the convoy without killing anyone. The load was seized. The escort was disarmed. No blood was spilled. No bodies fell. And yet the message arrived with perfect clarity. The rust lands could not be treated like a drain anymore. Word spread quickly. By nightfall, the compound had become loud with excitement. The workers were talking. The guards were talking. Even the old ones in the forge rooms were talking. Some with relief. Some with suspicion. Some with a very particular kind of hope that frightened Vanya more than hostility ever had. Because hope meant expectation. And expectation meant that if she failed them later, the fall would hurt. Gideon found her on the upper catwalk after the operation. "You're smiling," he said. Vanya glanced over the rail at the workers below. "They didn't kill anyone. That's your standard for victory. It's a good one." He leaned beside her on the rail and folded his arms. "For a royal, you're remarkably comfortable in dirty places." "I'm not sure that's a compliment either. It wasn't meant to be." But he was smiling again. Just barely. Enough to make her aware of how dangerous it was becoming to stand close to him. At night, the foundry changed character. The day's clang and whistle softened into a hum. The towers glowed faintly with furnace light. The workers drifted through the halls in smaller groups, quieter now, less defensive. Vanya walked the perimeter with Martha and found herself beginning to recognize names. Nira, the one-eyed mechanic. Toll, who repaired steam lines with impossible patience. Rin, the young runner who never stopped moving. Bren and Oda, the twin guards who finished each other's sentences. And Gideon, who seemed to appear wherever something was about to break. He looked tired all the time. Not weak. Just carrying too much. Vanya started noticing when his shoulders tightened. When he skipped meals. When he stayed awake too long. When he'd been bleeding through a dressing and simply refused to mention it. She hated that she noticed. Because noticing meant caring. And caring in a place like this was not safe. Then came the rumor. A delivery runner returned from the outer ridge with a whispered report. The king had begun preparing a winter audit. That meant the border region would be scrutinized, which meant the Rust lands would either be forced into compliance or punished for its independence. Gideon called a meeting in the lower hall. The workers gathered around the long iron table. Vanya stood near the back until Gideon motioned her forward. That in itself changed the room. Because no one had expected the queen to be invited into the center, and now that she was, everyone became painfully aware that she had earned the right. Gideon looked around the table. We're being watched. Nobody argued. The king's supply office has noticed the shift, he continued. We have two choices. We tighten and hide, or we prepare for retaliation. One of the older workers grunted. He'll retaliate anyway. Yes, Gideon said, but we can decide how much damage he does. The room fell quiet. Vanya folded her hands. Then she said, he won't send a full army. Gideon turned to her. Why not? Because if he sends too many men and fails, he makes himself look weak. He'll send an enforcement unit first, a smaller one, sharper, probably led by someone he trusts. And if that fails, asked one of the guards. Then he escalates, Vanya said, which means we need to make the first response expensive. That got a murmur from the room. Gideon's gaze remained on her. Explain. Vanya stepped to the map on the wall. Your foundry is not a fortress. It doesn't need to be. It needs to be a trap. She pointed to the intake corridor. The west rail. The loading bay. The upper pressure vents. The coal pit. The old drainage channel. Then she began outlining a layered defense plan that made the workers go silent one by one. Because she wasn't proposing a fight. She was proposing a system. And systems, if properly designed, made brute force look stupid. When she finished, nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Nira said, "That's wicked." Vanya gave a faint smile. "Thank you." Gideon looked at her with a very different expression than the one he had worn on the day of her arrival. Respect now. Uneasy respect. And underneath it, something that was starting to feel like trust. The meeting broke apart. The workers moved with renewed urgency. Martha stayed behind with Vanya and looked both terrified and impressed. "My queen," she whispered, "you are becoming dangerous." Vanya looked at the map wall. "I was dangerous long before this." Then lower, she added, "I just wasn't allowed to use it." And somewhere across the room, Gideon heard her. He did not turn, but his jaw tightened, as if the sentence had hit somewhere too deep. Chapter 3, The Secret Hybrid Bloodline. The weeks that followed changed the shape of the compound. More supplies arrived. More workers volunteered for shifts. More people began treating Vanya not as a guest, but as a fixed point in the daily order. She learned everyone's routines, She learned who needed reassurance and who needed orders. She learned who lied badly and who lied beautifully. She learned that Gideon always checked the upper catwalk before the lower floor. She learned that he never let anyone see him drink unless he was forcing himself to. She learned that, when he was silent for too long, it usually meant he was carrying bad news and would rather swallow it than pass it on. She learned far more than she had expected to learn about him. And that was a problem. Because the more she learned, the less he resembled the public story. He was not a reckless brute. He was not a broken animal. He was not a disgraced war dog gnawing at old injuries. He was strategic. He was careful. He watched everyone with the kind of attention that only came from surviving betrayal. He listened. He delegated. He protected without announcing that he was protecting. And when he looked at her, it was never with the flat entitlement Logan had carried like a crown. It was with an awareness that felt almost equal. The first time she noticed him watching her too long, she called him out on it. "You're staring." He didn't deny it. "You're in the way." "I'm not in the way." "You are when you stand in the middle of a walkway and read 3 transport logs at once." Vanya looked down at the papers in her hands. Then back at him. "You could have just asked me to move." "I could have. And yet you chose accusation." "I was hoping for obedience." She gave him a dry look. "You're getting greedy." He actually laughed again, but this time it lingered. It changed the air. The workers nearby noticed. Martha definitely noticed. Martha started noticing everything. Especially the way Vanya and Gideon began orbiting each other with increasing frequency. Especially the way Gideon seemed to appear wherever Vanya was working. Especially the way Vanya's voice changed when she was speaking to him, and she didn't seem to realize it. The slow burn became impossible to ignore. It wasn't flirtation exactly. It was friction. 2 people who understood each other's competence and kept testing the edges of it. 2 leaders pretending not to be interested in the fact that the other one kept becoming more impressive. Then one evening Vanya slipped during a heating inspection. It was small. Almost nothing. A dizzy ripple. A hand to the wall. A sharp inhale she tried to cover. But Gideon saw it. Of course he saw it. He was at her side instantly, one hand steadying her elbow. "What happened?" "Nothing." His eyes narrowed. "Vanya." "I stood too close to the vent line." "That is not nothing." She tried to pull away, but the room tilted harder than before, and she had to brace herself against his shoulder. He froze. And so did she. Because now she was suddenly aware of his hands on her arms, warm through the fabric, careful not to grip too hard. Martha came skidding around the corner at exactly the wrong time and nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. "Your Majesty," Martha said, alarmed. "You're pale." "I'm fine." "You are not fine," Gideon said. He sounded more irritated than frightened, which was infuriatingly helpful. Martha was already kneeling to check Vanya's pulse. The room fell still. Vanya wanted to tell them both to stop fussing. But then Martha's expression changed. Not alarm. Not uncertainty. Recognition. She went very quiet. Vanya felt the shift and looked at her sharply. "What is it?" Martha didn't answer. She looked from Vanya to Gideon and back again, as though the answer had suddenly become much larger than the question. Then she said very softly, "Oh." Vanya's stomach dropped. "Martha." Martha straightened slowly. "Your Majesty, sit down." "I don't need to sit down." "You do." "Martha, sit." There was enough authority in Martha's voice that both Vanya and Gideon actually obeyed. That startled everyone, including Martha. She inhaled, gathered herself, and said, "I'm going to ask something. Please do not panic." Vanya did not like the sound of that one bit. What? Martha looked straight at her. Have you been sick? Vanya blinked. A little. More tired than usual. Yes. Any nausea? Vanya hesitated. Gideon's attention sharpened. Martha already knew. The look on her face had changed into that particular kind of careful focus healers wore when the answer was already inside the room. Vanya swallowed. Yes. Martha's eyes widened. And your cycle? Vanya went still. That was not a question she wanted to answer in front of Gideon. Except now it was too late to pretend she had not heard it. Her throat tightened. No, she whispered. The room changed. Gideon's expression shifted first, though not in the way she expected. No smugness. No immediate calculation. Only stillness. Martha nodded once, as if confirming something she had suspected, but refused to voice too soon. Then she stood and said, You're pregnant. The words struck the room like a dropped hammer. Vanya felt the blood leave her face. For a second now, one moved. Then she looked at Martha, as if she had spoken in another language. That is not possible. Martha's voice stayed calm. It is possible. Vanya turned to Gideon. He was staring at her. Not at Martha. At her. And now his face had gone so carefully blank that it was impossible to know what he was feeling. Which somehow made it worse. Gideon, she said. He did not answer immediately. Then quietly, is it mine? The question should have sounded accusatory. It didn't. It sounded stunned. Vanya's breath caught. The memory came back in fragments. The night 3 weeks ago. The pressure of his hands. The heat of the forge room after the power line test. The closeness. The exhaustion. The moment they had both stopped pretending they were only working. That had been the first time they had let themselves cross a line, and it had not been careless. It had been mutual. Private. Trembling with restraint before it broke. Vanya's hand had moved first. Gideon's had followed. And then the whole room had gone from calculation to flame. She had not expected consequences. Not this kind. Not so soon. Yes, she said. Gideon did not speak. Martha looked between them and then very gently stepped back, as if she had decided this part of the room no longer belonged to her. Vanya's pulse was racing. She hated uncertainty. She hated the silence. She especially hated the fact that Gideon's expression was unreadable. Finally she said, "Say something." Gideon exhaled once, slowly. Then he sat back in the chair opposite her and pressed a hand to the bridge of his nose. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Logan thinks he exiled you because you failed to give him an heir." Vanya felt sick. "Yes. He doesn't know." "No." He looked up then. The look on his face had changed again. Dangerous now. Not toward her. Toward the king. You were carrying another man's child in his court for 3 weeks before he threw you out. Vanya stiffened. That is an unpleasant way to say it. It's accurate. Martha coughed into her hand, very carefully pretending not to listen. Gideon looked back at Vanya. There was a strange intensity in his eyes now, one she could not place. Not joy. Not fear. Something more complicated. Something older. "Are you afraid?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that Vanya almost laughed. "Of the baby?" "No, of what this means." Vanya looked down at her hands. The question hit the deeper layer. What this meant. To Logan. To the court. To the succession. To the power balance. To the lie she had been living inside. To the future she had not chosen, but might now be forced to build. Then there was the personal layer. The impossible layer. The part that had to do with Gideon looking at her, as if the answer mattered in a way he had no right to claim. She answered honestly. Yes. He nodded once, then said, "So am I." That startled her. He had not denied it. He had not tried to make it simple. He had not tried to claim ownership. He had only admitted fear. And that, more than certainty, was what made her chest tighten. Martha cleared her throat, apparently deciding the room had become too emotionally unstable for her taste. "We should take precautions," she said, "especially if the king sends inspectors." Vanya tried to regain her composure. "He will." Gideon's gaze remained on her. "Will he know?" "No. Not yet." Vanya shook her head. "Not if we're careful." That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling of the chamber. The foundry noises around her had softened into their night rhythm, but she could not settle. Pregnant. The word echoed like a bell. Not Logan's heir. Not the king's symbol. Not the final extension of his bloodline. Her hand moved slowly to her stomach. Nothing had changed physically yet, and yet everything had changed. A child. A future. A complication. A threat. A possibility. And beneath that, the thing she was least prepared to admit to herself. A child with Gideon's blood would not be a weapon against Logan. Not directly. It would be something far more dangerous. It would be proof. Proof that the king's line was not the only future the kingdom could have. Proof that the future could be built outside the palace. Proof that the Rust lands were not a punishment, but an alternate center of power. That thought alone made her pulse quicken. Then another thought followed. If Logan ever found out, he would want to erase it. Erase her. Erase Gideon. Erase the child. Her throat went tight. She heard the soft creak of the door. Looked up. Martha slipped in quietly with a cup of tea and set it on the small table beside the bed. "You should sleep," she whispered. Vanya gave a tired laugh. "I don't think that's happening tonight." Martha sat on the edge of the bed and lowered her voice. He looked shocked. "Gideon." "Yes." Vanya stared up at the rafters. "That does not help." "I think it does." "How?" "Because if he had wanted to treat this like a mistake, he would have gone cold." Vanya was silent. Martha glanced at her. "He didn't." "No," Vanya whispered. Martha folded her hands in her lap. "Your Majesty, I have lived long enough to know the difference between fear and cruelty." Vanya did not answer, because she already knew the difference too. And that was the problem. Chapter 4, The King's Broken Trap. Logan did not know about the pregnancy, but he did notice the missing revenue. And he did notice the border shipments. And he did notice, eventually, that the Rust lands were no longer acting like a place waiting to die. Which meant he became angry. And when Logan became angry, he always made the same mistake. He assumed anger was the same as intelligence. It was not. 3 weeks after the caravan interception, his enforcers arrived. Not a full army. Just as Vanya had predicted. A small, sharp unit. 16 wolves in iron-black armor. 2 scouts. 1 commander. And 1 man Vanya recognized at once as Logan's older brother, Lord Selim, the royal blade who took pleasure in making examples out of people who could not fight back. Vanya saw the banners from the upper watch platform and turned immediately toward Gideon. "They've come." He was already moving. The compound shifted into motion. Workers ran to their posts. Guards checked the gates. Steam valves were opened. Pressure chambers primed. Old shutters lowered over the vent windows. Martha appeared at Vanya's side with a sharpened ledger spike she had been carrying ever since the day of the caravan. "I knew this would happen," she muttered. "You say that as though it is reassuring. It is not meant to be." Vanya almost smiled, but the expression did not last. Below them, the enforcers approached the front gate. Selim did not bother hiding his contempt. He looked at the compound as if it offended him simply by existing. "Open the gate," he called. Gideon stepped forward alone. "State your purpose." Selim laughed. "You know my purpose. I've come to check whether the king's trash has learned to behave." A ripple moved through the workers. Vanya felt it. The tension. The anger. The desire to lunge forward. Gideon did not move. Selim's gaze drifted, and then he saw her on the upper platform. The mockery in his face shifted. Recognition. Then surprise. Then interest. "Well," he said slowly, "this is unexpected." Vanya stared down at him from above. "Did the king send you to retrieve me?" Selim smiled as if that question amused him. "He sent me to make certain the rust lands know its place. You are welcome to try." The workers around her looked up at that. Because queens were not supposed to speak like that. And yet when she said it, it did not sound reckless. It sounded inevitable. Selim's expression hardened. "Perhaps I should remind you that you are still the king's wife." Vanya's voice carried cleanly across the yard. "Perhaps I should remind you that I am no longer in his house." That hit a nerve. Selim lifted his hand. The enforcers advanced. The trap closed. The first pressure burst came from the side wall. Steam screamed through a hidden vent and forced the front rank to stagger. The second was the false floor panel near the loading bay, which collapsed under 3 of the armored wolves and dumped them into a mesh channel filled with smoke and iron chain. The third was the rail diversion. The carriage wheels locked. The fourth was the catwalk release. A crate of slag dropped with enough force to split the formation. Chaos hit the line all at once. The enforcers drew steel. The workers moved in coordinated counterstrikes. Nothing about the battle was random. That was the beauty of it. No wasted motion. No panic. No unnecessary blood. Only controlled collapse. Vanya watched from above, her pulse hammering, and realized with a cold kind of satisfaction that the king had just learned what it felt like to fight in someone else's architecture. Then the outer wall alarm rang. Another unit. More than the first. Logan had not trusted Selim alone. He had sent backup, which meant the king had learned something too. He had learned that the rust lands could resist. And rather than stop, he had escalated. Gideon appeared at her side in the upper control room, breathing hard, coat dusted with ash. "Second wave from the North Ridge," he said. Vanya was already scanning the map. "Then they're trying to flank the intake pumps. Can we hold them?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her, waiting for the catch. Vanya pointed toward the old maintenance corridor. "If we divert the steam and collapse the loose wall segment there, we can seal the route. That traps 2 of our own workers on the far side. Only if they stay there." He stared. Then he understood. They had already checked the corridor. There was a side tunnel. A narrow crawl route through the old service spine. "Clear it now," he said. The next hour became a blur of iron and fire. Not gore. Not slaughter. Precision. The workers knew exactly where to move, because Vanya had mapped the compound like a living organism, and Gideon had taught them how to respond to pressure. The enforcers lost ground. Selim lost patience. And when he finally made his own move, it was to seek the shortest path to the highest value target. Vanya. He found her on the upper walkway when she was crossing toward the east vent. His sword came up in a clean arc. She saw it too late to dodge completely. The blade nicked her shoulder. Not deep, but enough to force a sharp inhale. Gideon roared her name from the lower level. Then he was there. Not fast enough to stop the first strike. Fast enough to take the second. The two men collided in the industrial smoke like two versions of the same brutality, both built by different systems, both trained to kill, both furious enough to make the whole walkway shudder under the force of the fight. Vanya grabbed the nearest bolt crossbow from a wall rack and loaded it with shaking hands. Selim went for Gideon's throat. Gideon blocked. The blow drove him sideways into the rail. Vanya fired. The bolt struck Selim in the shoulder and spun him just enough for Gideon to wrench the sword away and slam him hard against the support beam. For a second, the whole upper platform went still. Then Selim laughed. Bleeding. Wild-eyed. And furious. You've become sentimental, he spat at Gideon. Look at you, saving a queen like a damned lover. Gideon's grip tightened. Vanya's heart slammed. She had not expected the words to hit her the way they did. Not because they were true. Not because they were false. Because Gideon did not deny them. He only looked at Vanya. Just once. And that look said more than any speech could have. The battle ended before dawn. The enforcers withdrew battered and humiliated. The rust lands held. The workers cheered. And when the smoke finally began to clear, Vanya sat on a supply crate with Martha binding the shallow cut at her shoulder, while Gideon stood over her with blood on his sleeve and fury in his eyes. Don't do that again, he said. Do what? Get in the way of a blade. She gave him a flat look. I was saving your life. That was not your primary function. Martha, still tying the bandage, muttered, It should have been. Gideon shot her an exhausted look. Vanya almost laughed. Then Selim's words returned. Look at you, saving a queen like a lover. She felt the heat rise in her face and hated that he noticed. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then came back to her eyes. You're hurt, he said. It's a scratch. You're bleeding. You are also bleeding. He paused. Then he reached down and brushed a soot line from her cheek with the backs of his fingers. The movement was so gentle that it made her throat tighten. And because neither of them seemed capable of being reasonable anymore, Vanya leaned into the touch before she could stop herself. Gideon went still. The entire world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. His fingers at her cheek. Her breath caught between them. His hand moving carefully, as if he knew one wrong motion might shatter something neither of them was prepared to lose. Then Martha cleared her throat loudly and stepped away with the expression of a woman who had decided she had seen enough for one lifetime. That made Vanya step back too. Too late. Gideon had already seen the whole thing. And now the air between them carried an energy neither of them could pretend was absent. The battle had changed something. Not just in the compound. In them. Later, when the staff was regrouping and the wounded were being moved, Gideon found Vanya alone in the archive corridor. She was resting one hand against the wall, the other pressed to her shoulder, breathing a little too shallowly. He closed the distance at once. You should be in bed. I should be in 100 different places. You're injured. I'm fine. You keep saying that. Because you keep pretending to be concerned with my health when you're really concerned with your own lack of discipline. His mouth twitched. You're impossible. And yet you keep finding me. That landed. He looked at her then, fully, with none of the defensive edges he had worn before. The whole corridor seemed to quiet around them. Then he said, I meant what I said. Vanya's heartbeat shifted. What did you say? His jaw tightened once. Before, when Selim spoke, she knew exactly what he meant. It was the kind of sentence that needed no explanation and yet could still destroy a person. She held his gaze. Neither of them looked away. Then Gideon stepped a fraction closer and said, more quietly, "I'm not pretending anymore." Vanya's breath stopped. "Martha is in the infirmary," he added, as if that somehow made the moment less dangerous. "The woe. The workers are occupied. The gate is locked." Her pulse leapt. His expression was hard to read, but his voice was lower now, rougher. "I need to know whether you intend to run from me every time I say something honest." Vanya's mouth was dry. "I need to know whether you intend to say something honest often enough for that to matter." That was the wrong answer. Or the right one. Because he reached for her then. Not roughly. Not with hesitation. With a certainty that made the air itself feel charged. His hand settled at her waist. Her fingers closed around the front of his coat. For a second, they just stood there. Breathing. Measuring. Then Gideon kissed her. Not like a victory. Not like a claim. Like a confession he had delayed too long. The kiss was careful at first, but the restraint broke almost immediately because both of them had been standing too close to the edge for too long. Vanya made a soft sound against his mouth and pulled him closer. He responded instantly. The world fell away. The corridor, the blood, the battle, the foundry, the king, the future. All of it vanished into heat and breath, and the sudden, terrifying realization that this was not a mistake. This was the beginning of something they could no longer pretend they did not want. When they finally separated, both of them were breathing hard. Gideon rested his forehead briefly against hers. Then he said, voice low, "That was unwise." Vanya gave a shaky laugh. "You're the one who started it." "I know." She touched his chest, feeling the rough rise and fall there. "Are you regretting it?" His answer came without delay. "No." That should have been enough. It was almost enough. But then he said, "I'm regretting that it took this long." And Vanya's entire body went still. Because there, in one sentence, was the thing she had been too frightened to admit. That somewhere between the ledgers and the repairs and the small shared glances and the endless late-night planning, she had begun to want him in a way that was no longer safe to ignore. That she had stopped thinking of him as a useful ally, then as a dangerous ally, then as something much worse, something she could lose, something she already cared about losing, something she would not survive losing well. That night, for the first time in years, she slept with a strange ache in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. It was hope. And hope was far more dangerous. Chapter 5, The First True Threat. The pregnancy changed the story instantly. Martha insisted on careful food. Careful rest. No exposed fumes. No long hours in the lowest forge chamber. No unnecessary strain. Vanya hated all of it. But she obeyed more than she complained, because the reality of it had started to feel too large. The baby was still only a rumor inside her body, but everything around her had begun to shift in anticipation of the truth becoming visible. Gideon changed too. Not in the way she feared. Not by retreating. Not by becoming overbearing. He became quieter around her. More deliberate. More protective without making it feel like pity. He would hand her water before she asked. Clear pathways before she needed them. Move workers out of the furnace rooms if the air got too heavy. And sometimes he would watch her when he thought she was not looking, with an expression so guarded it made her chest tighten. One evening, she caught him staring at the bandage on her shoulder. "Still thinking about the battle?" she asked. He looked up, "Thinking about your bad decision." "That is the same thing you said yesterday." "It remains true." She folded her arms. "I saved your life. You nearly lost your own. And you would rather I let you die." "No," he said, far more sharply than intended. The room stilled. That answer hung between them. Vanya's expression softened slightly. Gideon dragged a hand through his hair and looked away like he had just said too much. She decided not to let him escape it. Then say the part you're trying not to say. He glanced at her. You enjoy making this difficult. I enjoy honesty. He snorted. That's a lie. Not from me. That made him go silent. Eventually, he said, if Logan had reached you first, he would have killed you. Vanya let out a slow breath. Probably. He wouldn't have done it directly. No, she agreed. He would have done it politely. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Then his gaze flicked briefly to her stomach, which was still not visibly changed, and his face tightened. There were no dramatic words after that. No grand promises. No declarations. Just the solid reality that they both understood the stakes now. A queen with a hidden pregnancy. A king with a failing grip on the border region. A foundry rising into something more than a shelter. A man who was beginning to care too much. A woman who had already started to make plans around that fact. And then, one morning, the Rust Lands received a visitor. Not a royal enforcer. Not a merchant. A courier. He came through the outer gate with a sealed parchment and a burned horse. When Vanya broke the seal, she read the first line and felt the blood drain from her face. Logan was preparing a ceremonial alliance. A marriage agreement. To a foreign high alpha. He was going to secure his political standing with another bloodline before the Winter Council. If he succeeded, his position would harden. The crown would look stronger. The court would rally. And any challenge to his rule would become much harder to justify. Martha saw her expression and knew at once something was wrong. What is it? Vanya passed her the letter. Martha read it and went pale. Gideon arrived a moment later, having been summoned by the sudden silence at the table. He took one look at Vanya and knew the letter mattered. What happened? She gave him the parchment. He read it in complete silence. When he finished, he set it down. Then he said, he's tightening the noose. Yes. Can he be stopped before the wedding? Vanya stared at the letter, thinking fast. The answer was technically yes. But not by force alone. Not cleanly. Not with the kind of gambit Logan would expect. And certainly not while hidden. She turned to Gideon. No, she said slowly, not in the way he expects. What are you thinking? Vanya's eyes sharpened. I'm thinking we stop treating him like a king who has the advantage. Gideon waited. And then she smiled. Not warmly. Strategically. We need to make him overconfident. Martha exhaled. That smile worries me. You should be worried, Vanya said. And she meant it. Because a plan began to form almost immediately. 1 part deception. 1 part patience. 1 part patience, broken only when the timing was perfect. She would return to the palace. Not to beg. Not to hide. Not to rescue an antidote or steal a key. She would return as proof. Proof of legitimacy. Proof of continuity. Proof that the heir he believed he had lost was still his advantage. The irony was vicious. But Logan's own arrogance made the trap possible. By the end of that day, Vanya had a route, a disguise, and a public entry strategy. Gideon listened to the first half of the plan with his jaw tightening. Then he said, absolutely not. Vanya looked at him. He held up the letter. You are pregnant, and you want to walk back into the king's court. Yes. With my child. Yes. With the man who exiled you because he thought you were worthless. Yes. Why? Because he needs to believe I'm still under his control. Gideon's expression hardened. And if he does, then we adapt. And if he decides to keep you there, then I smile and survive. He stared at her for a long moment. Then with quiet fury, he said, "I hate this plan." Vanya tilted her head. "That doesn't matter." "It matters to me." The words landed harder than they should have. He stepped closer. "You are not expendable." She met his eyes. "No, I'm not." "Then stop acting like a pawn." "I'm not a pawn." "Then stop speaking like the only thing that matters is winning." Vanya's face hardened slightly. "The only thing that matters is what happens after I win." That shut him up, because he knew she was right. And he hated that he knew it. For 3 days they prepared. Martha selected clothing that would let Vanya's profile read as elegant, but not obviously pregnant. The workers who could be trusted were briefed to keep the rust lands stable in her absence. Gideon arranged backup routes in case the palace became hostile. He pretended to be annoyed. Vanya pretended not to notice the way he kept finding reasons to be in the same room while she packed. The night before departure, he found her alone in the upper archive chamber, staring at the route chart. "You're still going," he said. She didn't look up. "Were you under the impression I'd changed my mind?" "No." He stepped beside her. "I was hoping." She turned to him. His expression was controlled, but not calm. Vanya set the chart aside and faced him properly. "If I stay here and hide, Logan keeps writing the future. If you go there, he might kill you. Then I'll be more careful than he expects." That is not reassuring. It isn't meant to be. He studied her. Then quietly, "I don't want you to go." The blunt honesty in the sentence made her breath stop for half a beat. Vanya folded her hands behind her back so she would not reach for him too quickly. "I know. I would say I'm asking you not to, but I know that won't matter." "No." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're insufferable. And you're still here." That made him look at her differently. Not with the sharp scrutiny of the strategist, with the more dangerous scrutiny of a man who had crossed too many lines to remain detached. His hand rose slowly, almost without permission, and brushed the side of her face. "Come back," he said. Her throat tightened. "You're assuming I'm leaving for good." "I'm assuming the palace is full of people who have hurt you before." She caught his wrist. He came through the outer gate with a sealed parchment and a burned horse. When Vanya broke the seal, she read the first line and felt the blood drain from her face. Logan was preparing a ceremonial alliance, a marriage agreement, to a foreign high alpha. He was going to secure his political standing with another bloodline before the Winter Council. If he succeeded, his position would harden. The crown would look stronger. The court would rally. And any challenge to his rule would become much harder to justify. Martha saw her expression and knew at once something was wrong. "What is it?" Vanya passed her the letter. Martha read it and went pale. Gideon arrived a moment later, having been summoned by the sudden silence at the table. He took one look at Vanya and knew the letter mattered. "What happened?" She gave him the parchment. He read it in complete silence. When he finished, he set it down. Then he said, "He's tightening the noose." "Yes." "Can he be stopped before the wedding?" Vanya stared at the letter, thinking fast. The answer was technically yes, but not by force alone. Not cleanly. Not with the kind of gambit Logan would expect. And certainly not while hidden. She turned to Gideon. "No," she said slowly, "not in the way he expects." "What are you thinking?" Vanya's eyes sharpened. "I'm thinking we stop treating him like a king who has the advantage." Gideon waited. And then she smiled. Not warmly. Strategically. "We need to make him overconfident." Martha exhaled. "That smile worries me." "You should be worried," Vanya said. And she meant it. Because a plan began to form almost immediately. One part deception. One part patience. One part patience, broken only when the timing was perfect. She would return to the palace. Not to beg. Not to hide. Not to rescue an antidote or steal a key. She would return as proof. Proof of legitimacy. Proof of continuity. Proof that the heir he believed he had lost was still his advantage. The irony was vicious. But Logan's own arrogance made the trap possible. By the end of that day, Vanya had a route, a disguise, and a public entry strategy. Gideon listened to the first half of the plan with his jaw tightening. Then he said, "Absolutely not." Vanya looked at him. He held up the letter. "You are pregnant, and you want to walk back into the king's court." "Yes." "With my child." "Yes." "With the man who exiled you because he thought you were worthless." "Yes." "Why?" "Because he needs to believe I'm still under his control." Gideon's expression hardened. "And if he does, then we adapt. And if he decides to keep you there, then I smile and survive." He stared at her for a long moment. Then with quiet fury he said, "I hate this plan." Vanya tilted her head. "That doesn't matter." "It matters to me." The words landed harder than they should have. He stepped closer. "You are not expendable." She met his eyes. "No, I'm not." "Then stop acting like a pawn." "I'm not a pawn." "Then stop speaking like the only thing that matters is winning." Vanya's face hardened slightly. "The only thing that matters is what happens after I win." That shut him up, because he knew she was right. And he hated that he knew it. For 3 days they prepared. Martha selected clothing that would let Vanya's profile read as elegant, but not obviously pregnant. The workers who could be trusted were briefed to keep the Rust lands stable in her absence. Gideon arranged backup routes in case the palace became hostile. He pretended to be annoyed. Vanya pretended not to notice the way he kept finding reasons to be in the same room while she packed. The night before departure, he found her alone in the upper archive chamber, staring at the route chart. "You're still going," he said. She didn't look up. "Were you under the impression I'd changed my mind?" "No." He stepped beside her. "I was hoping." She turned to him. His expression was controlled, but not calm. Vanya set the chart aside and faced him properly. "If I stay here and hide, Logan keeps writing the future. If you go there, he might kill you. Then I'll be more careful than he expects. That is not reassuring. It isn't meant to be." He studied her. Then quietly, "I don't want you to go." The blunt honesty in the sentence made her breath stop for half a beat. Vanya folded her hands behind her back so she would not reach for him too quickly. "I know. I would say I'm asking you not to, but I know that won't matter." "No." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're insufferable. And you're still here." That made him look at her differently. Not with the sharp scrutiny of the strategist. With the more dangerous scrutiny of a man who had crossed too many lines to remain detached. His hand rose slowly, almost without permission, and brushed the side of her face. "Come back," he said. Her throat tightened. He glanced toward the door, listened, then back at her. "We have horses in the courtyard," he said. "We leave now." Vanya looked at him. The words should have been easy. She should have said yes. She wanted to say yes more than anything. But then she thought of the council room. The taxes. The executions. The villages. The women who would never be allowed to speak. The children who would grow up under Logan's rule. And she understood something that made her heart ache. She could leave. And it would be safer. But if she left now, she would be abandoning the one position in the palace that could still be used to dismantle him from the inside. She had power here. She had legitimacy here. She had access. And if she ran now, Logan would simply replace her with a polished lie and keep going. Gideon saw the conflict in her immediately. His face hardened. No. Vanya blinked. No. You're thinking about staying. I am thinking. That's the same thing. She took a breath. You knew this might happen. I knew you would have reasons. She turned away, moved to the window, and rested one hand on the frame. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, very quietly, "Is this what happened to her?" Gideon went still. To Adelina. Vanya looked back at him. His expression had changed completely. The memory had hit too close to the bone. He looked at the portrait on the wall, then back at her, and the pain in his face made her chest tighten. She thought she was safe when she became pregnant, he said. Vanya said nothing. Then she lost the baby. The room was silent, except for the soft crackle of the candle. His voice lowered. And then she lost another. Vanya's stomach turned. Logan told me the official story, she said. Gideon laughed once without humor. Of course he did. He dragged a hand across his mouth and looked down for a second before continuing. She was told she had failed, that she wasn't strong enough, that her blood was weak, that the crown could not be held hostage by a woman's body. Vanya's fingers curled against the windowsill. The cruelty was so familiar, it almost made her dizzy. He poisoned her, she said. Gideon's jaw flexed hard. Enough over time that no one questioned it until the end. Vanya shut her eyes. There it was. The truth behind the portrait. The truth behind the family silence. The truth behind the hard bitterness in Gideon's voice whenever he spoke about the king's private cruelty. He took a breath that sounded like it hurt. I was at court when it happened. Vanya turned to him. I was younger, comfortable, allowed to keep my title because I was useful enough and obedient enough and too stupid to understand what was happening fast enough. His voice roughened. I knew he was difficult with her. I knew she was struggling, but I looked away because it was easier, because I wanted my place, because I didn't want to lose my comfort. He stopped. The shame in him was nearly visible. And Vanya suddenly understood that his anger at Logan was not only political. It was personal guilt sharpened into purpose. He swallowed hard. By the time I realized what he'd done, it was too late. Vanya stepped toward him. You were young. That doesn't matter. It does to the truth. He shook his head once. It was my sister. The words hit hard. And there it was. The grief. Not abstract. Not ideological. Family. Blood. The reason he hunted Logan so relentlessly. The reason he had become what he was. Vanya crossed the room and touched his face with both hands. You were not the king. I should have seen it. You were not the king. I should have stopped it. You were not the king. He looked at her. The grief in his eyes was so raw it hurt to see. So she did the only thing that could answer it. She pressed her palm to her stomach and then took his hand and placed it there too. His breath caught. The baby kicked. A sudden, unmistakable movement. Gideon's eyes widened. Vanya watched his expression carefully as the reality settled into him. This baby, she said softly, is a line Logan cannot erase if we do this correctly. Gideon stared at her. She continued, voice steadying as the plan clarified. He thinks I am here as a restored queen, a useful vessel, a political symbol. She looked him dead in the eye. He doesn't yet realize I am also his proof of succession. Gideon's face sharpened. Vanya's voice dropped. When the child is born, the kingdom will not accept a violent overthrow unless the succession is clear. He understood instantly. Not as a romance. As power. And that was why she knew he would hear her. We need the king gone, she said, And we need me in his place until the heir is old enough to rule. Gideon stared at her for a long time. Then he sank to one knee before her. The gesture was quiet, not submissive, deliberate. His hand remained against her stomach. "What are you doing?" she whispered. His expression was solemn when he looked up. "Pledging myself." The words made her chest ache. "You don't have to." "I know." Vanya's eyes stung. He held her gaze with complete seriousness. "You are not a mistake," he said. "You are not a placeholder. You are not the woman he discarded." Vanya swallowed hard. "You have my word," Gideon said. "We will put you where you belong." The sincerity in the sentence nearly undid her. She looked away first. Then, because she had to know, she asked, "And if I stay?" He stood slowly. "Then I stay too." The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No performance. No escape route. He lifted a hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that made her almost forget the danger of everything around them. Vanya closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. Then she said, "I can't leave now." He did not look surprised. "I know. I have to finish this. I know that too. If I run, I become a fugitive. Yes. If I stay, I become leverage. Yes. If I stay long enough, I become the only legitimate alternative." Gideon nodded once. "You've already made the right calculation," he said. "Now you just have to survive long enough to use it." She laughed softly at that. Not because it was funny, because it was true. Then Gideon kissed her. Slowly. A little desperately. As though he knew this room might not be safe again for a long time. Vanya kissed him back with equal certainty. When they finally separated, footsteps sounded in the corridor. He stepped away instantly and moved toward the window. At the sill, he turned back. 2 months, he said quietly. "Hold on for 2 more months." She touched her belly, then looked at him. "I can do that." He gave her a fierce, proud look that made her ache. "That's why you're the queen." Then he slipped into the night, and the room was empty again. But Vanya was not the same after that. The decision had been made. The kingdom was not merely a cage now. It was a battlefield. And she intended to win it. Chapter 8, The Knife Behind the Curtain. The final 2 months of the pregnancy were the longest of her life. Everything became harder. The stairs. The heat. The meals. The meetings. The wait. The patience it required to smile at Logan and keep her eyes clear and her voice calm, while he went on talking about alliances, inheritance, loyalty, and the health of the royal line. He liked to watch her now. That was the part she hated most. He looked pleased to have her near him again. Pleased to have her visibly pregnant. Pleased to believe the kingdom had been corrected by the return of his wife and the continuation of his bloodline. He never once asked whether she was happy. He only asked whether she was comfortable. And when he did, it always sounded like ownership masquerading as concern. The council meetings worsened. Vanya listened in silence while officials debated food diversion from the outer villages. A famine relief shipment was delayed. An old mining town was reassigned to military labor. A physician's request for more medicine was denied because the stores were being redirected to the palace wing. She felt the fury build every day. Logan was hollowing out his own kingdom. He believed he was preserving strength, but he was actually producing collapse. The only reason it had not already broken was because too many people were afraid to admit how far the damage had gone. One evening, she sat in the council chamber and watched a nobleman praise a work camp expansion with the calm tone of a man discussing new garden beds. Vanya almost spoke. Then she saw Logan looking at her, watching to see if she would. So she stayed silent. And and that silence made her feel sick. That night, she wrote notes by candlelight after everyone else had gone to sleep. Routes, names, storehouse codes, council members who might fold, council members who would resist, people who feared Logan, people who profited from him, people who hated him enough to turn if given evidence. The list was not long, but it was enough. Then the window opened again. Vanya looked up and her heart almost stopped. Gideon slipped inside just as before, cloaked in dark cloth, snow dusting his shoulders this time, despite the season not yet fully turning. She stood too quickly and had to steady herself on the bed frame. He was across the room in an instant. Careful. You're here. His gaze moved over her face, then her stomach, then back to her eyes. Yes. Her breath shook. You came. I said I would. She wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. He looked terrible. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had crossed too much distance on too little sleep. And still he had come. Did you make it out clean? She asked. He nodded once, as clean as I could. And the rust lands. Stable. And Martha. Still terrifying. That finally brought a small smile to her face. Then she noticed the limp weight between the shoulders of the two men waiting outside the window shadows. Vanya's expression changed. What happened? Gideon. Gideon's face tightened. Aster was poisoned. The air went cold. Vanya was already moving. Bring her in. They carried Aster into the room, pale and sweating and barely conscious, with a dark sheen under her eyes. Martha came running almost immediately from the adjoining chamber when she heard the alarm. The room became a whirl of urgency. Martha was checking pupils and pulse before the door fully closed. The rest of the night belonged to medicine, cloths, tea, and careful pressure. Gideon stood back at first and watched Vanya and Martha work. Then he said quietly, I brought the antidote. Vanya turned sharply. You did. He met her gaze, then looked away as if the admission irritated him. Yes. Where? He did not answer. Gideon. Not here. Where? The answer came after a pause. It's in the wall. Vanya stared. He crossed to the far side of the chamber, lifted a loose stone from a seam near the portrait frame, and drew out a small vial hidden deep in the cavity. Martha looked from the vial to Gideon and then muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like, Men are impossible. Vanya put a hand on her hip, despite the discomfort of her shifting weight. Why would you hide something this important here? Because no one would think to look. That is not an answer. It is the answer. She gave him a deadly look. He met it without flinching. And then, impossibly, he said, because I wanted an excuse to come back. The room stopped. Vanya stared. Martha froze in the middle of a cloth fold. Even Aster, half conscious, made a small sound of awareness. Gideon's jaw tightened. I knew that if I had to retrieve it later, I'd have a reason. Vanya looked at him. She did not know whether to be furious or moved. So naturally, she became both. You're unbelievable, she said. I know. You hid the antidote inside the palace wall because you wanted a reason to return. Yes. She crossed her arms. That is manipulative. Yes. And reckless. Yes. And infuriating. He stepped closer. Also yes. For 1 second, they simply stared at each other. Then Vanya looked away first, and that annoyed her. Martha made herself extremely busy with Aster's pulse. The antidote worked. The fever began to break. Color returned to Aster's face by dawn. By morning, she was conscious enough to complain about being thirsty and angry. Martha finally relaxed. Gideon, who had been leaning against the doorway as though he might collapse at any second, swayed suddenly. Vanya noticed instantly. "Gideon, I'm fine." "You are not fine." He tried to wave her off. Then his knees buckled. Vanya caught him before he hit the floor. The force of his weight startled her, but she braced herself and got her arm under his shoulder. "Gideon." He was burning hot. Too hot. She looked at him in alarm. His eyes were glassy. His face was gray beneath the soot. Something cold went through her. Then she saw it. Just above his collar. A trace of black. Her breath vanished. No. The veins. They were spreading again. Vanya's hands went to his face. "When?" He tried to answer, but the words slurred slightly. "Same ambush." "You idiot." A weak, humorless exhale passed his lips. "Not helpful. You didn't say anything. You had enough to do." She stared at him in disbelief. He actually looked surprised by her anger. Then, with obvious effort, he whispered, "I love you." The words hit her like a blade. She went still. He blinked heavily, then said it again, as if the first had been too quiet to count. "I love you." Vanya could not breathe. He was half collapsing in her arms, and still managed to look ashamed that he had taken this long to say it. Her throat tightened violently. "You do not get to say that, and then die on me." A faint, pained almost smile touched his mouth. "I'm trying not to." "That's not enough." "I know." The black veins had started creeping faster than she liked. Martha was already kneeling beside them, face grim. "It's worse than the girl S was," she muttered. Aster pushed herself up in bed, pale but now coherent. "How long?" Vanya asked. Martha looked at the black line under Gideon's skin and made a pained sound. "Days," she said, "maybe less." Vanya felt the room tilt. "No." Martha kept going, voice careful. The first antidote slowed it the last time, but he clearly hid the fact that he was hit again. The poison's deeper now. "Then give him more." "There isn't more." The answer landed like a hammer. Vanya turned on the room. "There has to be." Martha's face hardened in sympathy. "The first vial was all we had." Vanya stared, then immediately started pacing. "No." "Your Majesty." "No. We need to get more from the palace stock." Her head snapped up. "What?" Martha swallowed. "The king's private stores." Vanya already understood the implication and hated it instantly. "Who has access?" Martha hesitated. "Then, only you." The room fell quiet. Everyone looked at her. Gideon, barely conscious, tried to shake his head. "No," he whispered. Vanya knelt beside him. "Yes." "No." "He'll kill you." "Not before I walk out with what I need." Gideon's fingers closed weakly around hers. "There's another way." "There is. There always is." She touched his cheek with the hand he was not holding. "No, there's only the one that works." His eyes, fever-bright and full of pain, searched hers. She hated how much she wanted to say yes to the safer option. But the safer option was just another form of surrender. And she had survived too much to give in to the first convenient fear. "I'm going," she said. Gideon shook his head, but the movement cost him. Vanya pressed her forehead to his for a single second. "Stay alive." His answer was thin and fierce and barely audible. "Come back." She stood. Then Aster, still propped up against her pillows, said sharply, "I'm going with her." Everyone turned. Aster's expression was pale but determined. "I've recovered enough to travel." Martha looked ready to object. Aster kept going. "If I stay here, I'll just be a patient. If I go, I'm useful." Vanya stared at her. Then slowly she nodded. Because Aster was angry enough to be dangerous and smart enough to survive it. All right, Vanya thought. Then let's become dangerous together. The plan changed immediately. The rest lands would hold. Martha would stay with Gideon. Aster and Vanya would go to court. And if Logan thought he still had control over his queen, he was about to be reminded just how costly that mistake could become. Chapter 9, The Theft of the King. Returning to the palace, a second time felt different. The first return had been a performance. This one was a threat. Vanya entered through the gate with Aster at her side and a new line in her posture. Not submission. Not ease. Preparation. The guards froze when they saw her. Some because of surprise. Some because of the pregnancy. Some because they had no idea what to do with a queen who had once vanished and now returned with the exact kind of gaze that made men check their own swords. Aster played the role of midwife and attendant perfectly. She looked solemn, efficient, and invisible in just the right way. Logan received them in his private chambers. He looked delighted. Too delighted. Vanya hated that with more force than she could easily name. "My queen," he said, turning as she entered. "You return again." She bowed just enough. "I was invited." He smiled at the shape of her stomach and approached, and with such fine timing. Vanya let the silence hang. Then she said, "The child has been restless." His eyes sharpened. "Oh." "Yes," she said, watching him closely. "I've been experiencing discomfort." He reached for her hand. "That's unfortunate." "Yes. You should have sent word." "I wanted to avoid causing concern." He smiled in approval. Vanya nearly laughed at how predictable he was. Logan was always at his most dangerous when he thought himself generous. He led them into the chambers adjoining the study. Aster stayed back near the doorway, quietly studying the locks and exits. Vanya focused on Logan. He was talking now about accommodations, security, the need to protect the queen, the future heir, the palace's responsibility to the line. All the while, she was watching the keys at his belt. The key rang. The private store key was visible for exactly long enough to matter. She let 3 days pass. 3 days to make him comfortable. 3 days to make him think the return had been a reconciliation. 3 days to turn his ego into a trap. Then on the 4th evening, she took action. Dinner was elegant. Overly so. Logan had arranged a physician, servants, and 2 advisors at the table. Vanya felt sick before the first course arrived. That was useful. She set down her cup and placed a hand over her abdomen. Logan noticed immediately. "Vanya." Her face paled on command. "I feel strange." He stiffened. "How?" "My head." He leaned forward. "And the baby." She drew in a shaky breath and pressed one hand to the side of the table as though steadying herself. "It hurts." That got him moving. The moment the pain entered the conversation, he stopped thinking. Exactly as she had hoped. He was at her side in an instant. "Vanya." She let her breathing go unsteady. "Burning." His face changed. "Poison." The word was there before she ever had to say it. He bolted upright and shouted for the physician. Vanya clenched her jaw while the room erupted in panic. Logan's hand touched the side of her face, shaking. "Who did this?" Vanya let tears gather at the edges of her eyes. She made herself sound frightened. "I don't know." Then she added the line that mattered most. "Please save the baby." Everything after that became performance and timing. Logan shouted for the private antidote. The servants ran. The physician looked alarmed. Aster, from the side of the room, held herself almost too still to be believable. The key came off Logan's belt faster than Vanya expected. He had been so terrified by the thought of losing his heir that he was no longer thinking about anything else. A servant returned with the vial. Logan snatched it and held it to her lips. "Drink all of it." Vanya swallowed enough to make him believe she had obeyed. She allowed the rest to remain in her mouth, while she kept her breathing shallow and her face pale. Logan hovered while she recovered. Then, at last, he stepped away to speak with the physician and attendants. That was the moment she needed. The second the door closed, Vanya spat the remainder of the antidote into a hidden vial inside the sleeve seam of her gown. Aster entered quietly a few minutes later. Vanya handed over the vial. "It's not the full dose." Aster took it carefully. "It'll have to do." The girl's eyes flicked to the door, then back. "Will you be all right?" Vanya almost laughed. "No." But that was not the kind of answer that mattered. "I'll manage." Aster nodded once. Then, very quietly, "I didn't like you at first." Vanya arched an eyebrow despite herself. Aster went on, "You looked too polished, too calm. I thought you'd come back to use us." Vanya looked at her for a long moment. "And now?" Aster glanced toward the door. "Now I think you might be doing something even stupider than that." Vanya snorted softly. Aster's mouth twitched. Then she vanished into the corridor with the antidote. When the door shut, Vanya sat very still and counted the silence. 1, 2, 3. Only then did she let herself exhale. Now they had the medicine. Now Gideon might live. Now the real work could begin. Chapter 10. The Palace Unravels. By the time winter fully settled over the kingdom, Vanya had become something impossible to ignore. She was seen in council. She was seen at meals. She was seen in Logan's chambers. She was seen with a visible pregnancy that the king proudly treated like proof of his continuing virility. And all the while she listened. That was the most important part. She listened to the way they talked about villages. She listened to the way they discussed labor quotas. She listened to the way they dismissed the deaths of miners and the closures of poor districts and the temporary suffering of people who had already suffered too long. She listened to every sentence, and every sentence made the picture clearer. Logan was not merely cruel. He was collapsing his own kingdom in slow motion and calling it discipline. The council did not stop him. The nobles enabled him. The servants feared him. The guards obeyed him. But fear is not the same as loyalty. And Vanya was beginning to collect the proof. At night, she sorted names in the margin of old papers. Who could be turned? Who could be bribed? Who could not be trusted? Who had family in the outer provinces? Who feared the work camps? Who had lost someone to one of Logan's stability measures? The list became a map. Not of the kingdom. Of pressure. Then one night, while she was reading by candlelight, the window opened. Vanya's head snapped up. The familiar shadow climbed in with the same controlled grace as before. Gideon. For a moment, she could only stare at him. Alive. Again. Her heart crashed so hard it hurt. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her like he was equally aware that they had both been living on borrowed time. You came back. He gave a tired, almost smile. You sound surprised. I'm not. His eyes tracked over her face, then lower, to the fuller curve now visible beneath her dress. He went still. Then he looked up again. How are you? The question was so simple, and so loaded that her throat tightened instantly. Still here. That wasn't my question. She looked at him. He was pale under the lamplight. Tired. Too thin. But standing. And that mattered. Better, she said softly, now that you are. The words did something to his expression. He moved closer. Not enough to touch yet. Just enough that the air between them changed. Her body remembered him immediately. Her pulse jumped. She hated how obvious it was that she had missed him. How much? Gideon looked at the portrait on the wall and then back at her. Adelina was my sister. Vanya had already guessed. But hearing it made the grief in his face make even more sense. I know. She would have liked you. The statement nearly broke her. Vanya swallowed. I hope so. He nodded once. Then very quietly he said, she lost 2 babies before she died. Vanya's hands went cold. Gideon spoke with brutal precision now, as though the facts themselves were blades he had carried too long. She thought she had to keep trying, because Logan kept promising that the next one would be enough. Vanya stayed completely still. After the second loss, she was weaker, more frightened. She began to think the problem was her body, that if she was just better, stronger, more obedient, he would stop punishing her. His voice roughened. He never stopped. Vanya shut her eyes. Poison, she whispered. Gideon nodded. Slow enough to look like tragedy, efficient enough to keep the court from asking questions. He looked sick at the memory. I was there when she died. Vanya stepped forward and took his hands. He looked at her like he had not expected comfort from the one place he had come to speak honestly. I should have seen it sooner, he said. You were not the king. That doesn't erase what I failed to do. No, Vanya said, but it does explain why you kept fighting after you finally understood. His jaw tightened. He looked away, then back at her. That is why he has to go, he said. Not just for my family, for everyone. Vanya felt the weight of that settle into place. Yes, she said, I know. Then she told him everything she had learned inside the palace. The tax reductions, the diverted medicine, the work camps, the planned alliance marriage, the council members, the weak points. By the time she finished, Gideon had gone still in that dangerous way she recognized now as focus rather than anger. Finally, he said, You've been building a case. Yes. Who else knows? Martha, Aster, the workers, enough to move if needed. Gideon studied her for a long time. Then he asked the question she had been waiting for and dreading equally. What do you want to do? She looked at the portrait of Adelina, then at her own reflection in the darkened glass, then back at him. I want the kingdom to stop mistaking inherited cruelty for legitimacy. Gideon's expression shifted. That answer pleased him. It was also the most dangerous answer in the room, because it meant she was ready. He came closer, lowered his voice, and said, Then we need a clean end. A clean end does not exist. It can. With Logan. With the right evidence. Vanya leaned one hand against the table. My return gave him a symbol. Yes. My pregnancy gave him a future. Yes. Then we need to take both away from him at once. Gideon's gaze sharpened. You already have a plan. She smiled faintly. I do. And so the final phase began. The kingdom had not yet realized it, but the queen it had discarded was now using its own rituals against it. The winter wedding ceremony for Logan's foreign alliance was approaching. The palace was preparing for pageantry, for legitimacy, for speeches, for public unity. And Vanya intended to arrive with the truth like a blade hidden inside silk. Chapter 11, The Wedding Feast. The Foreign Alliance ceremony was held in the Grand Hall. The room was dressed for celebration. Gold drapery, crystal lamps, winter greenery, music, wine, counselors, nobles, trade envoys. A few of Logan's most loyal enforcers placed strategically near the walls. Vanya entered without warning. The hall went quiet before anyone had time to understand why. She was no longer the discarded queen, no longer the uncertain exile, no longer the woman people pitied in whispers. She entered with her pregnancy visible, her posture perfect, her face calm, and Gideon at her side in a dark formal coat that made him look less like an outlaw and more like a commander who had finally decided to stop asking permission. The Ashen Pack entered behind them in full iron armor. The sound of boots changed the room. The music faltered. Logan stood from the ceremonial table slowly. Shock rippled over his face first, then anger, then an attempt at royal composure. "Vanya," he said, his voice carrying, "you return at an unexpected time." She looked at him the way one might look at a locked door. Unexpected is one word for it. The foreign alpha bride, standing near the high table, glanced between them with clear alarm. Logan's jaw tightened. This is not the time. It is exactly the time. The hall remained frozen. The council watched. The nobles watched. The guards watched. Every eye in the room was now pinned on the queen who should not have been there. Vanya walked forward until she stood directly before the banquet table. Then she placed a leather folder on the polished wood. "Before you attempt to continue this performance," she said, "you should read these." Logan looked at the folder without moving. "What is this?" "Your end." That got a murmur from the room. He reached for the folder. Inside were ledger copies, route confirmations, sealed medical records, and correspondence that traced the supply theft and the poison access chain. His expression changed piece by piece as he read. At first annoyance, then disbelief, then fury, then the white-hot realization that every line had teeth. "You cannot possibly think these are proof of anything." "I think," Vanya said, "that if you continue speaking, I will have to remember you once admired my patience." A few nobles looked deeply uncomfortable at that. Logan looked at her stomach, then at Gideon, then back at the papers. "Where did you get this?" "From the kingdom you've been exploiting." His face darkened. "You are forgetting your position." "No," Vanya said, and for the first time in the hall her voice sharpened. "I am finally understanding it." She stepped closer. "You exiled me because you thought I was useless. You sent me away because you could not tolerate a queen who did not bend every time you looked at her." Logan's gaze hardened. "The child you carry is mine." "No." The word struck the room. A few nobles visibly leaned in. Logan stared at her. Vanya held up a second document, then a third. She did not need to scream. The papers did that for her. The records showed medical alterations in the king's private stock. The bloodline reports showed repeated treatment for fertility enhancement with no long-term outcome. The healer's annotations, carefully copied and signed, made the picture clear. Logan had been chemically compromised for years. He was not a father in the way he claimed. Not a stable heir maker. Not a divinely blessed line. He was a man who had spent years trying to manufacture inheritance through poison and ritual and control. The hall erupted. The foreign alphas people began speaking in low, urgent tones. The council members shifted uneasily. One noble muttered, "That explains the delays." Another said, "This can't be right." Logan stepped forward, face hardening. "This is treason." Vanya's smile was small and cold. "No, treason is what happens when the truth threatens a liar." She turned and faced the council. The room was listening now. She knew it. And so did Logan. "You all knew me as the queen who failed to give the king an heir," she said. "You all heard the story that I was sent away for my health. You all accepted silence because silence was easier than looking too closely at what was happening in your own court." The room stayed quiet. Vanya's voice carried. The rust lands are being stripped to feed the palace. Villages are being starved. Work camps are expanding. Medical stock is being stolen from the sick and redirected to the royal wing. And every one of you has benefited from pretending the kingdom is stable. Logan's hand moved toward his sword. Gideon shifted immediately. The soldiers at the wall tensed. Vanya did not stop. The man standing before you has lied about the succession, lied about his fertility, lied about his queen, lied about his sister, lied about the outer provinces, lied about the border territory, lied long enough that you mistook deceit for order. Now she stepped fully into the center, and the hall, by instinct, gave her the space. I am carrying the child of a man who has no need to poison heirs because he is not trying to own the future. Logan snapped, enough. Vanya looked directly at him. You sent me away to erase me. Instead, you gave me time to learn who your kingdom really is. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the older council members, a woman with silver at her temples and a permanent hard line to her mouth, stood slowly and said, "Show us the rest." Logan turned sharply. The councilwoman did not flinch. Vanya handed over the final stack. Medical signatures, supply orders, correction logs, a sealed note from one of Logan's own physicians describing the repeated use of fertility enhancers that damaged circulation and metabolism. The room shifted again. That was the moment his reign began to crack. Because the people who had followed him out of fear were now staring at proof. Proof that the weakness had always been his. Proof that the blame had been redirected. Proof that the woman he had discarded knew enough to dismantle him publicly. Logan's face reddened. You planned this. Yes, Vanya said, I did. The foreign alpha bride quietly stepped back. One of Logan's enforcers took a half-step forward, then stopped when he realized half the room was no longer on the king's side. Gideon moved to Vanya's right shoulder. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. The exact place where she wanted him. Logan's voice lost its polish. You will not take my throne. Vanya tilted her head. No, you gave it away the moment you mistook obedience for loyalty. Then she said the line that broke the room wide open. I am not here to beg for your mercy. I am here to announce your replacement. A silence followed that was so deep it felt physical. Then the High Council began to move. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Slowly. Deliberately. The silver-haired woman stepped away from Logan's side. Then a trade lord. Then 2 border representatives. Then a military accounting officer. Then another noble. Then another. The room was not revolting. It was drifting. The people closest to power were choosing the side least likely to kill them. Which in politics is often what loyalty means anyway. Logan looked around and realized what was happening. For the first time in years, he looked truly uncertain. And uncertainty in a ruler is as loud as panic. Vanya saw it. She did not miss her chance. She lifted her chin and addressed the room in a voice that carried without strain. The kingdom will have a lawful regency until the heir comes of age. The current crown will be removed pending inquiry and formal transition. Logan. Logan's face went white. You cannot do that. The council can. And they already were. The argument did not become a battle. It became a collapse. The old structure had relied on everyone agreeing not to look directly at the lies. Now they were looking. And once that happened, Logan had nothing left except the force he could no longer use openly. His hand twitched toward his weapon. Gideon saw it instantly. So did everyone else. The guards moved. The nearest enforcers hesitated. One of them actually stepped backward. Because Logan had finally reached the point every tyrant reaches when the room realizes the throne is only furniture. Vanya watched him. Not with gloating. With certainty. "You never should have underestimated the woman you sent away," she said. Then the council moved on him. Not violently. Not with blood. With legal force, witness force, and the brutal humiliation of a ruler stripped of narrative in front of the people who used to believe it. Logan was disarmed. His title suspended. His authority seized. The room that had once bowed to him now looked everywhere except at him. And Vanya stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, feeling the baby turn inside her, and suddenly understanding that she had crossed into a life she could no longer reverse out of. The foreign alliance broke before it began. The wedding feast dissolved into emergency votes. The courtiers scattered. The council declared a temporary regency. Logan was taken under guard. And for the first time since she had walked out of the palace in exile, Vanya felt the kingdom's grip loosen. That night, after the hall emptied and the chaos settled into paperwork and witness statements, Gideon found her alone in a side chamber. She was sitting on a bench by the window, one hand over her stomach, staring into the dark. He shut the door behind him. For a moment, he did not speak. Then he crossed the room and knelt in front of her. Vanya looked down at him. The expression on his face softened her immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked. She let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "No." That made him smile faintly. "Good." She stared at him. He brushed a thumb lightly across the side of her hand, then said very quietly, "You won." The words struck her in the chest. She shut her eyes briefly. "We've only won the first part." "Yes." He stood, then sat beside her, careful with her space. Outside, the palace was still alive with movement. Inside, the room was quiet enough to hear the candle wick. Vanya leaned her head back against the wall. "Do you think the council will hold?" "Yes." "Do you think they'll accept me?" "Yes." That was too easy. "I'm being optimistic." She laughed softly, then turned her head to look at him. His gaze held hers with absolute steadiness. After a moment she asked, "Did you ever think this would happen?" He shook his head once. "No." "Me neither." He studied her face. "Do you regret coming back?" The question was so gentle that it hurt. Vanya looked down at her hands. Then she answered honestly, "I regret that it had to be like this." He nodded. "Do you regret staying?" That one was harder. She looked back up. "No." Gideon exhaled. Then he lifted his hand, hesitated only briefly, and brushed his knuckles along the curve of her cheek. Vanya leaned into it. The intimacy was small, but everything with them now felt enormous. "I thought," she said softly, "that if I came back too early, I'd lose everything." "You nearly could have." "Yes. And yet you stayed." She smiled faintly. "I'm getting better at dangerous choices." Gideon's lips twitched. "That is not comforting." "It's not meant to be." He looked at her for a long time. Then, "I love you." The words were no longer a shock. Not now. Not after the night in the palace wing. But hearing them again, in this room, after the hall and the council and the coup, made her chest ache in a way she had not expected. Vanya let out a slow breath. Then she said, "I know." He raised an eyebrow. "That's all." She touched his face with her free hand. "No, it's just that I'm finally starting to believe it." His expression changed. Softened. And for one impossible second, the entire palace, with all its blood and lies and years of harm, seemed too far away to matter. Then the baby kicked. Hard. Vanya startled and laughed in spite of herself. Gideon's gaze dropped instantly to her stomach. His face changed into the strange, stunned awe he still wore whenever the child moved. That expression made something in her soften too. "What?" she asked. He looked up. "I keep forgetting this is real." Vanya's hand covered his over her belly. "It is." He nodded, still looking amazed. Then, because the moment had become too quiet to ignore, she said, "You realize this means you're trapped with me now." He gave her a tired look. "That is the least concerning thing in my life." She laughed. And for the first time in a very long time, it did not feel like the laugh of someone surviving. It felt like the laugh of someone arriving. Chapter 12, The Queen Beneath the Ash. The months after the coup were not peaceful. They were harder in a different way. A kingdom does not become stable because a bad man is removed. It becomes unstable in new, more honest ways. Vanya spent long days in council sessions now, no longer beside Logan, but at the center of policy debates. The regency needed structure. The air needed protection. The border territories needed rebuilding. The work camps had to be reclassified. The supply thefts had to be audited. The rust lands had to be formalized instead of treated like a dumping ground. There were endless arguments. There were endless forms. There were endless old men who thought she should smile more and speak less. She did not smile more. She spoke more. And that alone made half the room nervous. Gideon remained near her. Not always visibly, but always there. A shadow in the hallway. A report at the table. A pair of boots outside her chamber door at the end of long nights. The foundry had become more than a refuge now. It had become the model. What the kingdom might look like if people were not spent and discarded. What leadership might look like if loyalty were earned instead of demanded. The council, under pressure and public scrutiny, slowly began adopting Vanya's reforms. It was never clean. Never fast. But it moved. And movement, she had learned, was its own kind of victory. The child grew. Her body changed. The window of the palace that had once felt like a cage now became a frame for a future she was determined to shape rather than endure. Aster visited the palace more often now. She brought documents, messages, requests from the rust lands. She also brought opinion, which was often less useful and more accurate. Martha moved between the palace and the foundry, bringing medicine and gossip with equal competence. And Gideon became something she had not expected the kingdom to allow. Not simply commander. Not only ally. Not just the man she loved. He became the one person in the room who did not treat her regency as temporary. He spoke to her like a ruler because he believed she was one. That mattered more than romance ever could. There were hard moments. Doubt. Rumors. Resistance from nobles who resented being managed by the woman they had once written off. But every challenge sharpened her. Every insult clarified her. Every day she remained visible, made it harder for the old story to survive. Then the birth came. It was long. Hard. Too long. The chamber filled with heat and voices, and the deep, furious determination of the women and healers around her. Gideon was not allowed to be in the room for the worst of it, and he hated that. Martha hated that. Vanya hated everyone briefly, which Martha claimed was normal. At the end of the labor, when exhaustion had turned the room to fog, the baby finally cried. A sharp, small sound. Then again. Vanya wept before she could stop herself. When they placed the child in her arms, the world shrank. A boy. Small. Red-faced. Angry to be alive. Perfect in a way that made every pain before him feel suddenly abstract. Gideon was brought in after the immediate danger passed. He stepped into the chamber like a man crossing into a new country. For a moment, he did not move. He only looked at the child. Then at Vanya. Then back at the baby. She had never seen him look so unguarded. "Come here," she whispered. He did. Slowly. Carefully. He sat beside her on the bed and stared at the child as though the smallest movement might make the moment vanish. "What do we call him?" he asked. Vanya smiled through the exhaustion. She had already thought about it, but she wanted to hear him ask. "Cairn," she said softly. He looked at her. "Stone marker." "Yes." "Why?" She looked down at the tiny face in her arms. "Because he is proof that something can stand after everything around it has burned." Gideon's expression changed. Then he reached out with one hesitant finger and touched the baby's hand. The infant closed his fist around Gideon's finger immediately. A sound came out of Gideon that was almost a laugh and almost a breathless disbelief. Vanya watched him and felt the ache in her chest turn warm. The months after that became history. The Regency stabilized. Logan's influence disappeared. The council restructured. The border territories were formally recognized. The Rust lands received legal protections and administrative authority under Vanya's oversight. The foundry became a center for trade, repair, and training. The old system resisted, then yielded, then adapted, then tried to pretend it had always intended to be reasonable. Vanya was not interested in giving anyone the comfort of forgetting. She made the records public. The supply theft, the work camp deaths, the poison use, the false air claims, the truth about Adelina, the truth about the borderlands, the truth about the king. No one could call it rumor anymore. No one could claim ignorance. And that was the real victory. Not simply removing Logan, removing the silence he had depended on. Years later, when people spoke about the queen who rebuilt the kingdom, they did not speak of a woman found in a carriage crying over an exile order. They spoke of the woman who signed her own sentence and turned it into a strategy. They spoke of the queen who entered the Rust lands with ledgers instead of tears. They spoke of the queen who treated industry like power and compassion like policy. They spoke of the queen who sat in council while she was pregnant and did not let anyone confuse her gentleness with weakness. They spoke of the queen who looked at a fallen system and decided to build something stronger. And most importantly, they spoke of the queen who never needed rescuing to become real. On the day Cairn turned 1, the foundry held a celebration. The smokestacks burned gold in the evening light. Children ran through the repaired courtyard. Workers carried trays of food across the yard. Martha complained about the noise. Aster tried to act as though she had not arranged 3/4 of the event. Gideon stood beside Vanya near the central forge, with the child on his hip, and a faint smile finally becoming more common on his face. The kingdom had not become perfect. It had become honest enough to improve. That was enough for now. Vanya watched the people moving through the repaired halls, the restored walkways, the gleaming rail lines, the hearths and kitchens and training rooms that had once been ruins and now held life. Gideon noticed the look on her face. "What are you thinking?" She turned to him. That Logan was wrong. He raised an eyebrow. About what he threw away. Gideon looked at her, then at the child on his shoulder, then back at the foundry. Vanya smiled. He had meant to discard a queen. What he had actually done was exile the one woman who could have rebuilt his world without him. And that, more than revenge, was the final punishment. Because the greatest thing Logan ever lost was not his throne. It was the future. And Vanya had taken it with her when she left, then built it from ash.